Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Red and White Authority, episode number 17, as we look at Game 2 between the Detroit Red Wings and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Concluded yesterday afternoon. Tampa evens the series at one game apiece, defeating the Red Wings by a score of 5-1. Peter Mrazek, as has been his habit, after having a great start for the Detroit Red Wings, seems to get pulled his next game, although I'm pretty sure that you can't blame a lot on Peter Mrazek yesterday. The Red Wings had several breakdowns, and it was kind of odd. They thought that they played a better game, yet the score would indicate that they were, that they were routed at 5-1. But if Mrazek doesn't stand on his head in Game 1, it could have been maybe 10-1 Tampa Bay or 10-2 or whatever. But 10-3, I guess, because they scored 3 goals. Anyway, before we begin there, though, Kevin Allen joins us, of course, a Hall of Fame hockey writer from USA Today. Kevin, last night, again, great theater provided by the NHL with their draft originating in Toronto. And anytime I hear the NHL is doing anything that originates from Toronto, I am overjoyed because it is going to come down as hokey as possible. I compliment the league with those envelopes and Bill Daly trying to get them out, and it was classic. It reminds me of years ago. I always loved when the NHL awards were in Toronto, and the station I was working at the time, I would beg, please send me there, because it would be Ron McLean doing, a long rambling kind of stand-up, and, Canadian rock bands, God bless Celine Dion and Nickelback and all that kind of stuff. But groups you never really heard about before, they would perform and all that. Now they've moved it to Vegas, where it gives you that American glitz, which is hokey in its own right, trust me. But last night I just thought it was utterly hilarious. And what really struck me was when Daly said, yeah, we have a winner, it's the Edmonton Oilers. I think that his expression almost mirrored Conner McDavid's expression when they kind of saunter him out onto the set in Toronto with George Strombanopoulos, and he looked about. I'm not going to say he's going to Eric Lindros it, although I made a joke about that on Twitter last night, but I think everybody was shocked. We've talked about it, and, this is probably great for the Edmonton Oilers, and I'm going to throw it all the way back, Kevin. I know I'm rambling a bit here. Back to Detroit, where the Lions had a history of drafting wide receivers with their number 1 pick. And then finally they get it right with Calvin Johnson, which was pretty much a no-brainer. Now, you would have to think that Conner McDavid, even though I'm not going to take anything away from Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Yakupov and all the guys that they have drafted number 1 before, Taylor Hall, but this is a can't-miss prospect by everybody's account. So, Edmonton gets it right. Great for the Oilers. How good is it for the NHL? Because if you're making Gretzky comparisons, Gretzky eventually had to move from Edmonton to L.A. to get any kind of relevance whatsoever in this country. And, and I hate to say that. I know we have a huge Canadian audience, and, I know the Maple Leaf fans are looking every show for me to, take a swipe at them. But I almost wish you would have gone to Toronto if I had to choose between Toronto and Edmonton. Kevin, I gave you a lot on your plate. I know that, but your thoughts on the whole McDavid sweepstakes?
Well, I thought the best place for him to end up would have been, from the league's perspective, would have been Arizona or Florida. I thought he would really have brought some visibility to, 2 franchises that are still trying to build a fan base, and really, I think would have saved either of those franchises. I mean, it sort of reminds me of Mario Lemieux going to Pittsburgh and suddenly made that franchise relevant. And, Toronto, I thought, oh, boy, it was such a media circus there. It just wouldn't be good for the kid to go there. I never even entertained the possibility that he was going to end up in Edmonton. Like, I was thinking, okay, maybe Philadelphia will get him, or New Jersey. Toronto had, okay odds compared to everyone else to get him. And, the top 3 had a 45% chance of getting him. So, that's still, not even odds. So I really didn't give it much thought, but it was staggering when it happened. And I agree with poor Conner McDavid was sort of trotted out there and he looked like a deer in the headlights. And I think he was like me. I don't think he even entertained the possibility. What are the odds that they're going to keep, getting these, #1 picks 4 and 6 years? Now, saying all that, I agree with you that it's not the first choice, from the league's perspective. But, I know a lot of my Canadian colleagues see this as an opportunity to get a Canadian superstar in a Canadian city. And if you think about it, there really isn't one. If you go to Vancouver, the Sedins are good players, but they don't have that pizzazz that you need. Edmonton really doesn't have a guy either. The Calgary Flames, are a good team, a rising team, but they don't have one. Certainly in Toronto, that team is falling apart. There's nothing in Ottawa. The best case you can make for a Canadian superstar in a Canadian city would be Carey Price. But, goalies are special and unique. So there was a lot of talk in the build-up of this, is that wouldn't it be great if Conner McDavid could end up in Canada? And the one thing I would say, I think it's a little bit different, him going to Edmonton, than it would be for if he went to a Western team in the United States, because in Canada, all the Canadian teams get a lot of publicity. So he'll get noticed there. And the fact that there's going to be sort of a comparison to Gretzky's arrival there, there'll be a build-up there. But would it have the same impact that if he had gone to the United States? No, I don't think so. I think that could have been a real bonus for the NHL. And now that he's going to Edmonton, because the other element is, you don't need to build the game in Canada.
Right.
You need to build the game in the U.S. So anyway, I think if you would have had fans vote on where they would like to see Conner McDavid go, and there were 14 teams, given the fact that everyone's a little tired of the Oilers getting the top pick, I think they would have fallen in the bottom 2 or 3 in terms of desirability of Conner McDavid going there. So it just wasn't a great fortunate turn of events for the NHL.
No, and Kevin, I think you hit it right on the head. The problem is going to be with NBC, or if ESPN, and there's all kinds of rumors circulating that eventually, now that they're involved in the World Cup, that maybe they're going to try to work out some sort of deal and bring hockey back to ESPN as well. But the problem is that when you're looking for a game of the week, unless Conner McDavid is putting up 200 points a season or something, chances are when you say Edmonton Oilers, it registers nothing in the United States. And I think from a league standpoint, you're right. I mean, and that's your problem. You cannot – he's one player, but when you say an American city, American franchise on an American television network, Americans might have some sort of passing interest, if they even know where it is, because we know geography is not a strong suit for most Americans. But with that said, the Edmonton Oilers, Conner McDavid is going to be a tough sell in Detroit's case south of the border, but for the rest of the nation north, it's just not going to happen. I mean, I just don't see how this really can benefit the league, no matter how great a player he is. And in a strange sense, I think that he was hoping, as we talked about earlier, I think he was hoping he was going to go to Arizona and play with Max Domi. I mean, I think that that's really what he wanted. And, up until they said Bill Daly finally struggled with the envelope and brought it out and said, oh, we got a winner. We got a winner with Edmonton, I think, but, the NHL just lost. I mean, and I'm sorry, I might be overreacting, but I don't know how you're going to sell the Edmonton Oilers and Conner McDavid in the United States. And let's be honest, that's where you want to sell the game.
Yeah, and NBC has come a long way with regard to the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens. They accepted the idea of the Maple Leafs for the Winter Classic as, hey, Americans sort of get that Toronto's a special franchise. We're going to do it again, with the Montreal Canadiens playing, the Boston Bruins, because they get that rivalry is important, and that fans understand in America that, there's a rivalry there. But it's a little bit different in trying to convince them that, hey, maybe we ought to have the Winter Classic between the Minnesota Wild and the Edmonton Oilers. That's not going to sell quite as well. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with the assessment on TV. I think you will see the Oilers, on NBC Sports Network because of the Conner McDavid, but not as often as you would have seen had he even gone to Buffalo or Arizona.
Right.
Those are not high-profile teams either, but I think the NBC would have embraced that and sort of made them important teams because Conner McDavid. And I think when you said unless he gets 200 points, well, he's not going to do that. But if he could have a 120-point season or 110-point season, that could make it a little bit better. You could see a little bit more attention being paid to him in Edmonton. But the Oilers have to get better, and that's another story in itself. He's going to a team that has not, has had four number one picks in the last 6 years now, and hasn't managed to get in the playoffs. They haven't been in the playoffs in a long time, and now they've got to get it right. There's a lot of pressure on Edmonton now. They got Conner McDavid to finally get this right. We can't continue to be a struggling team there when you have a player who could be in the top 3 players in the league within a couple of seasons.
Let me ask you this then, Kevin. I mean, number one, can Edmonton get it right? And number two, do they trade for a goalie? And could Jimmy Howard be on the move to Edmonton, perhaps? And maybe Detroit could snag one of those young forwards that there might be a surplus of on the Oilers roster.
Well, I suppose anything is possible. I'm reasonably sure that the Buffalo Sabres are going to make a inquiry about trading for that number one with Jack Eichel there. I mean, Tim Murray's got to call. I mean, he's got to call and he's got to offer because they need help defensively. They need a young defenseman, and he's got Zadorov, and he's got Ristolainen in Buffalo, 2 young defensemen. He could put together a pretty nice package. If you're offering Jack Eichel, now I don't think the Oilers are going to trade him, not for a minute, but the Sabres could really tempt them. Like they've got a lot of good young players, and they can say, hey, the scouts are saying that. In fact, Dan Marsh said it to me a week ago that every other year Eichel could be better or Conner McDavid could be better. It could be just one of those situations where some years Ovechkin is better than Crosby, and some years Crosby's better than Ovechkin, but they're both really good. So I wouldn't put past to Buffalo making a pretty strong offer, saying, hey, look, we all agree that Conner McDavid's a little bit better. But we can offer you quite a package here. So it'll be interesting to see what'll happen. But I do agree that the Oilers now, the pressure on them is twofold. They've got to get a goaltender. They have to fix their defense, which is one of their biggest problems. And now they got to sort out their forwards. And I think the one good thing they have going for them is you can see the lessons learned by the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins had Malkin and Crosby, and they have never, in the whole time those two guys have been in Pittsburgh, never had enough wingers to play with both of those centers. Right. They've always been at least one short, and now they're 2 short, in my opinion. They just don't have enough wingers. And I think that's what the Oilers' now mandate would be. If you're going to take Conner McDavid, you got to decide right now, okay, how are we going to get 4 wingers to complement these players? Now, Everly's already there, Hall's already there. I think both those players are, I'd be looking to keep them around. And they've got Yakupov. They can make decisions on him. A lot of people think he's never going to blossom to be the player that everyone hoped he would be when they took him number 1 overall. So you can make a decision on him. They did just sign him to a contract extension, which tells me they have some belief in him. But I think you got to, decide perhaps to trade Nugent Hopkins or maybe Draisaitl, who they picked last year. I think I might trade Nugent Hopkins because I think you'd get a lot for him, and you might be able to fix both problems, or at least 2 of the 3. You might be able to get a good young defenseman and another young winger to play with those 2 guys. So they've got, this is going to be fun for the Oilers, but they got to get it right.
Well, finally, before we get into the Red Wings here and the rest of the playoffs, very quickly, when you look at, Jack Eichel, Buffalo feels like they lost, or Buffalo's GM comes out and I feel disappointed for our fans. Jack Eichel, as you just said, every account that I've read said, listen, some years he's going to be better than Conner McDavid, and some years Conner McDavid's going to be better than him. They really are like 1 and 1A, or 1 and 1, let's say. And so did Buffalo really lose in this, I guess, or who made out besides the Oilers? Was there anything, because every position basically stayed the same except for the top 3?
Yeah, well, I think I know who the loser was. The loser was the Arizona Coyotes, because they had the second worst record, and now they're going to get the 3rd pick, and the 3rd pick is a long way from the first 2. So they are clear losers in this, which makes sense, because the Coyotes have struggled. We all saw in the Roadrunner cartoon the Coyote always ended up getting the short stick in the in the Roadrunner cartoon show. So the Coyotes lose here. They're going to end up with Strom, a big center who's good, but not like the first 2, Eichel and McDavid, or they're going to get Hanifin. It's hard for me to think of the Buffalo Sabres as losers in this, because we've all seen Eichel. At the start of last season, everybody said, hey, Eichel's great, but nobody said, hey, as a freshman, he's going to walk in and win the Hobey Banker. Nobody said, hey, as a freshman, he's going to walk in and lead the nation in scoring. So he's exceeded expectations. Like, he could be better than Conner McDavid. I mean, that's possible. It really is, and he's certainly the best American center prospect since Mike Modano. We all know what Mike Modano did. He's the leading scorer among all American-born players. This is still a win for Buffalo. They're not going to see it like that. One of the issues there is that McDavid obviously played in Erie, which is pretty close to Buffalo. A lot of these fans made the pilgrimage down to go look at him. There's been a lot of discussion about Conner McDavid. There are a lot of Ontario fans. I think at least 10% of their season ticket holders are Ontario residents. So there was a lot of sentiment that they really wanted Conner McDavid. So I'm sure they do feel a little bit of disappointment, but they could end up, benefiting by this. I mean, I don't like to bring this up, but everybody thought Alexander Daigle was pretty darn good too. Now right. They weren't crowing about Daigle the way they are about Conner McDavid. Nobody was calling Alexander Daigle a generational player, so I think there's far less risk of that. But I think it's possible that that Buffalo will end up with a better player. I mean, Eichel's a very good player, as we all know.
Right. Well, we'll see how it plays out. It was just interesting, and once again, I compliment the NHL for handing it over to our Canadian media brethren, who always put on a really good show. And, Stroumboulopoulos looked like he was stalking Conner McDavid there. When he wanted to bring him out to the studio. But, not kid George, fellow Greek, love you, George. You're doing a great job. But, I just thought it was, Kevin, at least give me this. All right, and I'm going to get off this. I'm sorry. I know we got to get to the Red Wings. They got to do something besides the cards, right? I mean, yeah, for sure. Or at least make them easy to open, smaller, so they don't form-fit the envelope.
Well, yeah. Well, let's go. Let's talk about this though. What about if the 14th team, and I can't remember who it was, would have won it? Like you pull up the first card and that's the winner. And
right,
which was possible. Yeah. So now all of a sudden you really got to fill some airtime. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not good TV the way they're doing it. The funny thing is everybody, because of the the tradition of the Ewing pick and the conspiracy theorists and so forth, there was some talk originally about just letting the balls come out and just match up the number that way. And they didn't feel like that was going to be good TV. Well, that actually might have been better TV than what we saw.
Well, Americans are used to watching the little balls on the lottery. I mean,
yeah.
You see it 4 times a day here in Detroit if you want.
Yeah.
This is my point too. And again, I'm going to get off this, but when when you have like the Sportsnet crew and all that, and I watched Hockey Night in Canada, and it's like, hey. And hello to our U.S. viewers. Let's get into all 6 Canadian franchises. When you're on American television and you're on NBC primetime Saturday night at 8, I think that you have to kind of kiss the tail of your U.S. audience a little bit. And if you don't do that, then you're missing a great opportunity, because the assumption is, and granted, it might be in Toronto and in Canada, that people actually know what the heck is going on here, where they really don't. A majority of them, let's watch the hockey game Saturday night. Hey, the Rangers are playing. We've heard of them. Oh, Pittsburgh has that Crosby, the Sid the Kid guy or something, there might be top of mind, but when you don't acknowledge that you're going to have a lot more people who probably don't tune into a hockey game on a Saturday night, and you've got this big event in draft where you have two iconic players in McDavid and Eichel, and you don't really cater to the Americans, I think, again, you're missing it. You're definitely missing to grow at least an audience or make them feel wanted, because as an American, when I watch at least Ron McLean and those guys were, they were all homers. They love Canada, and that's cool, and you should. And I love Canada too. Until I was 13, I thought I thought Ontario was like the 51st state. But
so, yeah.
Right, you know what I mean. I thought Windsor was America, but with that said, I don't kind of get that and understand it. I don't, the longest free border in the world, at least here in Detroit, Americans and Canadians are, joined at the hip. I just don't get a feel of warmth or let's be inclusive. I only get exclusive from when anything originates in Toronto and we have the Toronto gang doing it. It's like the United States doesn't even exist. And I just think that that's a mistake.
Yeah, well, it is a difficult line for the NHL to walk, because the game is so important, and it's woven into the fabric of the Canadian psyche. So you have to pay homage to that. It's just incredible how many people watch the World Juniors, for example, around the holidays in Canada. Their ratings for hockey are just so incredible, and you got to pay homage to that. On the other hand, I agree with you. NHL Network originates in Toronto. It doesn't originate shouldn't it be at the NBC studios? Shouldn't that be where NHL Network is? To give it sort of an American slant, because that's the potential growth. That's where the future is. It's already saturated in Canada. It can't get any bigger than it is in Canada, because they have 30 million people, and guess what? All 30 million people know that hockey exists. And we got 322 million in America, and I still think there's only a small percentage that could identify more than 4 or 5 teams. But one thing that I've always been bothered by, and I understood it early, but now I think we've moved beyond the idea that the approach is always is that you've got to explain everything to the Americans. And I don't think that's true. I think that the level of sophistication of the American sports fan is far greater than we want to give it credit for. And I think you could have put that show on within the U.S. with U.S. host and talk about it, the way that Canadian television could, and people would have caught on. They would have gotten it. They would have understood. Because basically, we have that in another sport. We've got it in the NBA. We get the whole lottery process. We get the guy that you want to get that first pick, because that guy can change your franchise. We understand that concept. So I think you could have done that, and brought in even non-hockey guys and done it, and still fans would have gotten it, and they might have been interested just to see, what city was going to end up with the lottery. We all kind of love the lottery as a basic idea of somebody, the Willy Wonka bar, the effect where someone's going to get the golden chocolate bar, and people like that. So I would have done it.
Right. I'm not saying have Gene Wilder or Johnny Depp dressed up as Willy Wonka or something, but because I think that Bob Costas should have hosted this thing.
Well, that's the point I guess I'm making.
Right.
I just didn't. I think they said, well, the fans aren't going to get it, but I think they would have gotten it, and it doesn't matter that they didn't know the sport, because they understand the principle. Everybody understands the lottery. When there's $1 billion at stake, guys who don't ever buy a lottery ticket buy a lottery ticket just because the idea that you might you get rich. And the same is true for sports lottery. Like, people just say, oh, well, some team's going to get a great player. Like, well, I wonder who it is. So
Right.
yeah, so they watch. So I'm sure, as I've said, that the way that came out yesterday, as a television presentation and as a result of where he ended up, probably was not how most of the people in the NHL would have liked it to come down.
No. All right. Well, let's drop it there. But again, I just think that there's some, when you love the sport and you cover it, and Kevin and I obviously have a love and passion for this game, and a love and passion for Canadians too. I mean, I don't want to sit here like I'm ripping, the guy, because I think they do a great job. I watch it. I watch it all the time. I mean, I really, really do. And I guess because I've watched it my whole life, I'm used to Americans sort of getting slighted. But when you're on NBC television, the free network NBC, Channel 4, shall we say, at 8 o'clock on a Saturday, and you don't even acknowledge your American audience or try to cater to them a little bit, I think you missed the boat. But anyway, we'll stop there. Speaking of missing the boat, it appeared that the Red Wings forgot what time the game started yesterday afternoon against the Tampa Bay Lightning. A strange game because, Kevin, I don't want to complain about the officiating because I think that it's very subpar in the National Hockey League because of lack of consistency. But is elbowing a penalty anymore, or does it appear, because the Tampa Bay Lightning are behemoths, that every time they go in to throw a check that they're throwing elbows at Red Wings and it's just not being called? Maybe it's me, but Datsuk really looked like he got elbowed into the face, and somehow Tampa Bay gets the power play, and which changed the course of the game very early on, and they scored. I mean, it's a great shot by Tyler Johnson, and he's not a big dude, but, I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I watched that game, and that was a penalty for sure. This is the argument that we get every year in the playoffs. The definition of a penalty changes in the postseason. It's not supposed to. And when we had the rule reformation coming out of the 2005 loss, there was a lot of discussion about changing that, and for a while it happened. But now we've sort of we've gone back to the days when there were rules for the regular season and rules for the playoffs. And I've seen sort of instances of that in the games that I've been to. I mean, obviously I was in Nashville, and I thought that the penalty standards now are suddenly a little bit different. And I don't think it altered the game. I thought yesterday's I know what you're saying in terms of the early momentum and getting the goal, but the Lightning weren't going to be denied yesterday. I think we sort of had predicted this. We didn't say it in so many words, but you expected the Lightning to come out, and as I said after game one, that's not the way they won. Was not a recipe that could be followed to win a series. That was the way you could win one game, but they had to improve. I thought the Red Wings were actually better yesterday. Had a little more push. But the Lightning were just as good, if not better, and pucks found the net. Mrazek couldn't be the savior that he was in game one. But I think it's hard for players on both teams to have different standards in the postseason for penalties than they have in the regular season, because then you're left to guess how the game is going to be called, and that's just wrong.
Well, and I agree, and that's when I talk about consistency with officiating. I think that if you're a player, it seems to change from minute by minute at times. You're not sure what to do, and for a while there, you see all kinds of things let go, and then you see something that's kind of ticky tacky, and it doesn't affect whether it was a scoring chance or not. But it's fast. They're on skates. I want to give referees the benefit of the doubt. I don't think anything is fixed. It's just that I don't understand their thought process when they're compelled to call a penalty and when they're not compelled to call a penalty. I mean, it just doesn't seem to have any kind of, as I said, consistency. With that said, I completely agree with you. The way I looked at Tampa, they came out flying. You knew that was going to happen. Jimmy Howard comes in and plays the third, gives up, I think, 1 goal on 12 shots, a rebound to Val Filppula towards the end there. I thought Jimmy looked good. You know, it looks like his head's into it. I thought it was a good move to have him start the third period, yet I didn't think that Babcock did it so much that he was disappointed in Mrazek. And I was glad that he came out immediately and said that he would start Game 3 Tuesday night in Detroit. So assess Peter Mrazek after 2 games. Where do you think the young 23 netminder is at? I think he's pretty confident and ready to go.
Yeah, I do too, and that wasn't a goaltending loss. You know, that was a team loss, and I think, you know, everybody understands that. Like, you know, after that game, we're not going around saying, wow, you know, if the goaltending would a little bit better, they would have won that game. You know, they weren't going to win that game. You know, the Lightning were destined to win that game, and I agree with you. I thought putting in Howard, you know, you want to keep him sharp, and you want to get his confidence back because, you know, the goaltending's unsettled here in Detroit. Like, hey, Mrazek's he owns the net now, but as Mike Babcock likes to say, he's got the net until he doesn't.
Right.
You know,
right.
So you know, having Howard, and I thought it was interesting because I looked up I wanted to see how many shots he had, and I was looking at the box score, and right at the on trade deadline day, there was some discussion on television on the coverage of trade deadline day about you know, advanced stats, and you know, there's you know, quite a firestorm still this season about, you know, how important they really are. But I heard for the first time, and which kind of surprised me that I hadn't heard this before, that someone has actually come out and made a determination, just like in baseball, and I actually dislike this stat in baseball, but is the quality start. And you know, I think it's meaningless. You know, it's basically a 4.5 ERA. But what they determine is a quality start in hockey for a goaltender is a 917 save percentage. And when you look at what Howard did in that period, he had 917 save percentage. So you know, that wasn't a start, but it was. I guess my point is it was a quality period.
Right. He had a quality period. The team didn't have really a quality game. I think it's very difficult for Red Wing fans to understand how the Red Wings, even though the series is tied 1-1, and I'm sure now after the game yesterday, they probably feel pretty fortunate that it's 1-1 because Tampa was every bit as good in Game 1 as they were in Game 2. It's just Mrazek played outstanding, and Ben Bishop wasn't very good. But with that said, that they were so upbeat and positive, not because the series was tied 1-1, of what they did yesterday, because it still looked like to me that Tampa was just relentless. They were just all over Detroit, and even though Detroit managed to, you know, a few more shots and some offense, it still seemed to be a lot of one and done, and at times it looks like the Red Wings are skating but going nowhere. So, I mean, are they just kind of fooling themselves, or do you think that, and granted, it's coming back to Detroit, and Tampa's a lot different team on the road than they are in Tampa, but, you know, I'm still figuring, guys, what did you exactly see yesterday that thinks that, you know, like, well, despite what the score indicates, Nicholas Cromwell, well, despite what the score, you know, we did a lot of good things. Yeah, maybe you did. yeah, right. You lost by 4. You know, to tell me all the good things you did. I mean, I'm trying to give them a benefit of the doubt, but I'm pretty skeptical about this.
Well, they have to play a lot better than they are now. I mean, a lot better, and you know, they're capable of doing that. Like, you know, I haven't seen as impressive as Tampa Bay has been, and I think Tampa Bay has been impressive in this series. I don't think that the Red Wings don't have any kind of chance against them. You know, we've seen the Red Wings play really, really well. You know, let's think about that road trip when they went on it and everybody was talking if they could come back 500, and they were, you know, they just played really well on that road trip. Yeah. And they've had, you know, stretches in here, even against Tampa, where, you know, you could see that they can put up a stingy defensive presence and, you know, get opportunistic goals and win a game. So I think they've got an opportunity, but they have to play significantly better. And to be honest, I think the pressure is on Detroit, not Tampa, because, you know, in order for them to win, you feel like they got to hold serve at home, and so I think the approach most fans have right now is, oh man, we got to win 2 games in Detroit. I get it that Tampa Bay has not been as strong on the road as at home, but you know, they're a force, and from what we've seen thus far, they're a dangerous force, and so that's why I think the Red Wings almost have to play 2 perfect games at home, and then they would have an opportunity. But if they don't, if it goes back 2-2, then it's just a best. Even if they just get one, it goes back 2-2, and it's a best of 3 with 2 of the games in Tampa. So there's pressure on the Red Wings now to crank it up. They have to play better than they did, and I know what they're saying. They were better yesterday. Like, they had more pushback, more offensive thrust. Nyquist and Tatar combined for 6 shots. That's what you need from them. You got to get some shots from them on goal because they're just not as deep as Tampa Bay. I watched that Palat yesterday, and he had 7 hits and a bunch of shots on goal. He was a defensive presence, and I'm thinking there. The Red Wings just aren't that deep, where they have guys like that are doing that, they're a good team, but I just think the depth of Tampa Bay right now up front is so strong.
Well, it certainly is. One good note that Mike Babcock expects, although Red Wings have today, this is Sunday, have today off, and they'll be back at practice tomorrow, is that he expects Justin Abdicator to be in the lineup, which is huge and big because I think part of the the beatdown that the Red Wings have been experiencing, Justin Abdicator can reciprocate to some of the Tampa Bay Lightning as well, which is absolutely huge. I mean, he needs to be back, but defensively, the Red Wings are still, and I think, although except early on in previous Red and White authorities, we've talked about this. They just seem to be lackadaisical in their own end a lot, and you certainly can't be lackadaisical against the Lightning. And a couple of questions here. Number one, I mean, they're capable of tightening it up. I mean, they're going to have to play maybe a little bit more of a conservative home game than maybe that they're used to. But if I'm Tampa, I'm not changing anything up. I got to be feeling great about myself going into games 3 and 4. And heck, if I'm Steven Stamkos, when I look up at the Raptors and see my general manager's name, his jersey hanging up there, I'm getting as enthused as anybody. I mean, I don't think that's. I think that Tampa, because of what happened last year and the way they played these first 2 games, feel great. You're right. Detroit has to do something here, and I guess my question is, are they capable of doing it? In all honesty, because this is getting eerily similar to the Boston series last year, where Pavel Datsyuk scores a goal with 3 minutes left in the 3rd period of Game 1, and they win. And granted, Detroit played pretty tough at home and lost the game in overtime, yet they still didn't find a way to win. So I guess, Kevin, in my long rambling, soliloquy or whatever, I mean, can they do it? I mean, I know we say they can. Tatar got a goal that, he didn't celebrate too much, maybe because of the score, but he was kind of sheepish, like, I didn't even shoot. I didn't even shoot. I mean, I was just sort of standing here, and the next thing I know, hey, I got a goal. But I mean, I'm trying to look for a silver lining here, and is it because Detroit will get last change? Is that going to be, the matchups will favor Detroit and Babcock is a tactician? Or, I mean, I'm trying to look for how realistically are they going to win these 2 games at home, which I agree with you are must-wins for the Red Wings.
Yeah, and it's almost like they're going to have to play the perfect road game at home. Because they really do have to play as if they're going to try to win this, 2-1 or 3-2, and they have to go back and channel their, first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the season when they were playing, very strong, stingy defensively, because it all starts on their defensive zone, and when they do that, their offense usually thrives as well, and I think that's what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to just concentrate on playing a real strong game. They do have to come out strong in that first period. They can't, sit back, because we've seen what happens when they do that in Game 1. When you back up and give them the zone and then try to bunker down, they just, it just makes them more dangerous. So, they're in a tricky position of they have to come out and play strong and hard. on the other hand, they have to limit scoring chances. So that's what I'm saying. It's almost like you got to play the perfect road game when you're at home. When you're at home, usually you take more chances and you push. And I just don't think they can do that. You can't do that against this team. They just have too many dynamic offensive players that can make you pay. And they've got to find and I think this is where the matchups come in handy. They got to find an answer to the number 2 line, the Tyler Johnson line. It's just been very, very effective. I mean, Stamkos is who he is, and he's going to get his opportunities. But I think that Johnson line is what's hurting the Red Wings because, you can shut down one line, but they don't seem to have any response for that second line. I think they're doing a better job on Stamkos than they are on Tyler Johnson.
Well, what do you do? Do you put Glendening's line then? Do you have him go up against Tyler Johnson? I mean, is that because Babcock is not going to just sit by. The Red Wings may have today off, but I'm pretty sure that he's watching video as we speak and trying to come up with some sort of plan.
Yeah, I mean, you could break Zetterberg and Datsuk up, and now you've got one of them on each line. Both of them are defensively responsible. If Abdicator's back, you can do that certainly. That's really going to help the lines because right now the third line hasn't been much of a threat. Anderson is on that line, and now he's. I don't know whether he or Landon Ferraro will be. I mean, Landon Ferraro had 3 shots on goal yesterday, and he's been pretty noticeable.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so maybe it'll be Anderson, but if Abdicator slots in, you start to move people around, and suddenly that third line gets a little bit better, and it becomes a little bit more dangerous, and that's hurt them. The Abdicator, also with the pushback too. The Lightning have been very physical, and Abdicator has been missed. I think I've been impressed with how the Red Wings have handled the physical challenge, though. I mean, they've been feisty, trying to, push back. But, they need a guy like Abdicator. So I thought it was interesting, too. I was looking at the minutes played that Eriksson only played 17 minutes yesterday. And I thought that in that game I would have expected him to be up, closer to 20, but that's not the way. It's not the way it worked out.
Well, has Brendan Smith does he deserve an opportunity? Is there a chance that he's out of Babcock's doghouse, or as Thomas Holmstrom would say, Babcock's dog yard? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I kind of feel for him, and I know. Look, and I know he's a lightning rod here in Detroit. I mean, people are saying, "What are you talking about? Guy's a turnover machine." Every time the poor kid does something, and I know two playoff series 2 years ago, he had a rough go. But do they make any changes on the blue line because defensively they're pretty leaky? But it's team defense too. I understand that. I get that, but. I'm just wondering, do you think that Babcock will tinker with his blue line at all?
Well, that's a tough call, but, if I'm trying to read the tea leaves here and sort of embrace some sort of logic, if I'm saying you're going to have to play the perfect road game at home, which means a little more conservative defensively, I think I favor Marchenko over, Brendan Smith because he is a guy that does take some chances and does make some mistakes here. Where I think Marchenko, one thing we've seen from him is he plays a pretty safe style. So, I don't see anybody else coming out of the lineup. So, I'm just guessing because it's hard sometimes to get inside Bab's head, but I would say there'd be no changes.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with you too. I mean, I throw out Brendan Smith there just because. And they're not scoring a whole lot of goals either, and he is a little bit more offensive-minded and a bit of a risk taker. But you're right. I mean, they have to play such a dumbed-down style that they probably really want to play, or that they usually play at home. That it doesn't cater to Brendan Smith's game, which means that depending on, I guess, how this thing plays out, he may not even see the ice during this series.
Yeah.
So
that's possible. Yeah, I mean, I wonder too about what's their options up front to try to get spice up the offense a little bit as well. With Abdicator coming back, I think, as I said, Anderson or Ferraro, and I think he's played pretty well, so it'll be interesting.
You don't think that I mean, Stephen Weiss seems to be in position. I'm not saying that he's playing poorly, but obviously he's paid to, get points. But do you see that, Babcock, who, let's face it, has not had any kind of apprehension to go young, that if they do sit a forward, I mean, Ferraro, I think, has held his own. Anderson, you're right. I mean, we've done shows, with all due respect to Joachim Anderson, where people forgot that he was even on the team. And he was playing virtually every game, but that maybe a guy like Weiss goes out, is that he tries to shake it up that way.
Yeah, I don't think so. Like I've noticed Weiss. He's a veteran guy who's put up points in the past, and I don't think this has been a good fit for him and Babcock. This has turned out to be a mistake. The injury started out slow, and now it seems like Babcock's made up his mind on him. But it's not like Weiss forgot how to play hockey. He's still capable. He makes plays where you can see why he was such a consistent performer for the Panthers for a lot of years. Now there was a little less pressure performing for a non-playoff team in Florida than there is for a Red Wing team that has been in the playoffs every year for almost a quarter century.
All right.
So,
Oh, go ahead, Kevin. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so I don't know. I don't think I wouldn't take Weiss out. I don't think he will either. I think it'll, come down to, as I said, Anderson or Ferraro, and I thought in Yurko too has been sort of visible as well. We've seen a little bit more from him. I mean, he's still not getting his scoring opportunities, but. I just think he's done more than Anderson.
Well, the thing about Yurko is I think that he's a big body too. He's
right.
A big kid, and so I don't think that I think you want to keep as many big people in your lineup as possible if you're the Red Wings as this series progresses. I want to ask you about two Lightning players, and the first one is Val Filppula, whom had kind of struggled this year. Did not have the sophomore season in Tampa to duplicate his first year in Tampa, but he certainly seems to be inspired. And he was always kind of a quiet guy here in Detroit, but I mean, verbal jabbing, that's too strong a word, but kind of playing around a little bit with some of his former teammates, some of the comments he's made in the media. But he obviously is playing very inspired hockey against his team. And and let's be honest. He was not a bad playoff performer for the Red Wings either. I mean, he pretty much shows up. So, he sort of has, desire in this series, and that does not bode well for Detroit.
No, and he's a playoff-style performer too, just because he's pretty defensive-minded. The Finnish players in general understand the defensive side of the game. They come over because that's just the way the game is played over there. Everybody thinks defense first, and then you come over here and you sort of work on your offense. And I think he has a little extra layer of motivation. I don't think he enjoyed his Babcock experience, and I'm sure wants to kind of show Babcock that maybe I was a little better. I mean, Babcock, in fairness to him, was just trying to get Filppula to be a better player, and I think he pushed him pretty hard. And I sort of had the impression that when it was time for Filppula to have his unrestricted free agency, he was ready to leave. He wanted, he wanted just a different opportunity, and I think I had the sense that he felt maybe some of the criticism of the way he played was not justified. He just, he considered himself a pretty good defensive minded player, and they were always on him to shoot more, and so I could see why he'd be motivated to play. And plus, it's always fun to, when you play against your former team, you want to just say, hey, I was pretty good when I was with you. Maybe I didn't get enough credit.
Well, people say it came down to, do you sign Phil or do you give the money to Stephen Weiss? And that was the conversation supposedly in the smoke-filled rooms at Joe Louis Arena, and obviously we know how that went. And let's talk a little bit about Ben Bishop as well. He rebounded nicely, but I got to be honest with you. I don't think the Red Wings tested him all that much yesterday. I mean, they got some shots on net, but really, Mrazek sat there, made like 4 saves on one play. I forgot who it was, who the Lightning was, but kept, couldn't get the puck up, but he kept his pad down to the ground. I still think he can be had, although he has to feel good that he rebounded so nicely and didn't give up any soft goals yesterday. If Mrazek, and I expect Mrazek to be good. I have no qualms about him heading into Tuesday's game. But Ben Bishop, did the Red Wings, by not really testing him all that much yesterday either, have they just given him a wealth of confidence that could not bode well for Detroit?
Well, I agree with that completely. They never, there was no second and third chances. It was, kind of one shot, and they weren't, top chances either. Like, I'd be interested to see the quality chance sheet, because it sure didn't seem like the Red Wings had a lot of quality chances. They had more, obviously, than they did in Game 1, and they had more shots on goal. And they looked more dangerous at times, but it wasn't one of those games where when you were done you said, "Oh man, Bishop really saved us." He never had to save them. I mean, they just really didn't test him, and you just made it easier on him. And I've seen some vulnerability in him, obviously, in this series. We saw in Game 1, but the Lightning defense is playing better, and I think that's the key. I mean, if you're sizing up the two defenses right now, the Tampa Bay is winning in the offensive end, and they're winning in the defensive end. The goaltending, to me, hasn't been a factor. It was in Game 1. It was a factor for the Red Wings, but what I'm saying is that's not deciding the series. It's been the defensive play and the offensive play of the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, that's been both of them have been very impressive. Like, when the Red Wings won the Game 1, the goals, I think we're going to blame Bishop on those goals. We're not going to blame the defense. I mean, he's got to stop the Clendening goal for sure.
No, there's no doubt. So, Kevin, I know we're going to do a show probably, I would assume, on Wednesday after our next Red and White Authority, after Tuesday's game. How do you see Tuesday unfolding? For some reason, I think based on these first two games and just how relentless Tampa was, and regardless if they're on the road or not, but besides, their general manager walks into town, and it's like Palm Sunday or something. So for him it is. So I don't think there's a lot of animosity towards the Tampa Bay Lightning in Detroit because of Steve Yzerman.
No.
So it's like, oh, that's Stevie's team. I guess if we can't do it, maybe Stevie's team should do it. I feel good for Stevie. So you got that kind of playing. So I'm kind of wondering, I'm just not feeling good about this series if I'm a Red Wings fan right now. I'm just not.
Well, here's the weird thing for me is that I don't even think, no matter how I phrase this, it's going to come out wrong, but I don't even think Game 3 is that big a game. To me, Game 4 is the game, because after Game 4, it's either going to be 3-1 or it's going to be 2-2.
Right.
And if the Red Wings, even if they win on Tuesday, they got to win that Game 4. I mean, that Game 4 is going to be so crucial. Otherwise, they're going to it'll just be all tied up, and we're going to play. As I said, it'll be best of 3. So, they've got to come out and play well. Show the Lightning that they have the ability to prevent them from doing what they've done in the first two games, which is to mount a very dynamic offense. They've got to find a way to counter that. They've got to slow that down. They've got to stop. They got to clean up the porch area. There's just too many guys around the Red Wings net. And they have to do that, and they've got to find a way to win these two games. But regardless of what happens in Game 3, Game 4 is going to be bigger. If I was a player, the coach would be on me now for looking ahead. But that's just the way it is. Game 4 is going to be crucial, because they're either going to be fighting to turn it into a 2-2, or they're going to be fighting to go up 3-1, and either one will be big. So, but they have to play a completely different game than they've played in Tampa Bay. They can't give up that many scoring chances and expect to win this series.
No. All right, Kevin. I want to ask you about some of the other series. I don't want to go through them real quickly, but I want to get to a quote in today's Detroit Free Press from Mike Babcock, and it's about Tyler Johnson, who was available, and Babcock wanted to sign him. He has a history with him. I guess he's known him for years, and this reminds me of a couple of years ago when they were eliminated by Nashville. Mike Babcock kept saying, "We have nobody. We have no forwards. They're better than us." And I know that people took exception within the Red Wing organization to that he was kind of throwing some people under the bus. Lo and behold, the Red Wings, I think, are the first to admit, the players that they thought were all NHL-level players but not difference makers, there's a lot more talent than I think the Red Wings even thought. But this is what he says, and here's today Free Press. Excuse me as I read this, but he says, Babcock, who knew Johnson as a kid, pushed for the Wings to sign him in the spring of 2011. This is from Helena St. James. It says, and now I'm quoting him, "When Tyler was available, I mentioned many, many times that we thought he'd be a good player. But what I know as a head coach in the NHL is that you don't see the players. You got scouts to see the players, and they make decisions. Just like we've traded players that were better than we thought. We've traded for players that weren't as good as we thought. We've made lots of mistakes over the years. You like your decisions to be more good than bad, but that's just not reality. Now, this kid has turned into an unbelievable player, and it just goes to show you size is not as big a factor as your ability to compete and the way you skate and the way you think." I mean,
wow.
I'm not sure. Mike Babcock speaks his mind. I'm not sure that you say that during a playoff series against the Tampa Bay Lightning, because it certainly sounds like you're throwing your scouting staff and the Red Wing administration not only under the bus. I mean, you're throwing them, completely overboard. And I think that's why when people keep saying, "Well, we got to sign Babcock," I think that's why if Mike leaves, there might not be as much love lost as you think. That they're not going to be exactly, getting out the hankies and having a cry jag or something in the Red Wing front offices. Now, maybe I'm overreacting, but I thought, wow, he's speaking his mind, he's speaking the truth, but I don't know, Kevin. Your thoughts after that.
That's not something probably that the Red Wing brass wants to see discussed, in the newspaper in a crucial playoff series. I would agree with that, and we don't exactly know quite what he meant by that. I mean, maybe he just meant that, and I always say this to GMs, and they sort of get a little irritated by it, but the truth of the matter is that when a GM makes a trade, or he's just guessing like the rest of us, there's no certainty. You got to make guesses, and maybe that's what the only thing he was trying to say is that you just guess, and the Red Wings have guessed wrong on some things, but that's not the way that it sounds, and sometimes you have to be careful that how your words can be interpreted, even if you don't mean them that way. So. It's not. That's not probably what should be discussed at this point. And it'd be interesting to get Ken Holland's take on what happened with Tyler Johnson. Maybe they made an effort and he wanted to go elsewhere. A lot of times it comes down to where players think the opportunity is. And if you look at it back when he signed, he may have thought that his road was blocked in Detroit. And he had plenty of opportunities in Tampa where they were building and they were developing. And the other thing too, and I've heard this mentioned by other pro scouts, the Red Wings tradition of keeping their players in the minors does not put them in good stead with free agents who don't like the idea that there could be in Grand Rapids forever and a day. So, right. It was sort of rare that they lucked out with the Kaiser because they could convince him that, he wasn't going to spend time down there, and he was sort of, he wanted to come to Detroit, obviously. So, that's a great system. keeping your players down there too, as Kenny Holland says, until they're overripe. But if you're dealing with young free agents who want the opportunity to play, sometimes that's a detriment as you're trying to recruit.
Well, let me ask you, do you think that this is a not-so-veiled way for Mike Babcock to let potential suitors know that, hey, I wanted Tyler Johnson, I didn't get him. I want a little more say in my next job, exactly who we're going to put on this roster?
Well, I think that's a given. I mean, given his position right now with so many teams likely to be interested, he's going to get money and power. I don't think it's any question of that. Whether he gets it here or elsewhere, he's going to have to get an increased say in terms of player development, because he's obviously not liked every player that he's been given here in Detroit.
No, well, and finally, let's just look at one series. Bob Hartley, famous from in Detroit here because of Colorado Avalanche coach, fined $50,000 for his way in 132 minutes at the end of the Calgary-Vancouver game. To single him out like that, I mean, quite a statement from the league, but what kind of carryover does that have? And were you surprised that Hartley was, usually it's a team or, he'll get some or something like that, but the league looked pretty adamant that, we really wanted to throw this right at your doorstep.
Well, and his reputation preceded him. Like, he'd already been fined once, for a similar situation. He's had that reputation when he was in the minors before he came up to the NHL. This wasn't his first rodeo with regard to, escalating combat, at the NHL level. So, I mean, it's interesting because Brian Burke likes the physical play, and I was kidding him that how weird was it that he ended up in Calgary where they had the perfect coach for him. Like, Bob Hartley was born coach for Brian Burke. I mean, those two can sit down together and tell war stories about physical hockey games, because they both like the game played the same way, a little rougher than is allowable under NHL standards.
Now, Kevin, do you know if it's true or not that it was John Tortorella that delivered the news to Hartley?
He walked down the corridor with an escort of NHL officials to deliver the news. I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. You have $50,000, buddy. Anyway, all right, Kevin. Well, we'll see. The Red Wings are certainly capable of it, and Tampa is not a good road team, as we said. Although, usually when a team during the playoffs goes on the road and goes into the opposing city, it's hatred time. But, when you have Steve Yzerman leading the Lightning emblem down the street, I think it's real tough for people here to build up any animosity towards that team. The officials is different, but the team itself is a little. I don't know. I mean, we'll see how it plays out, Kevin. So I know you're traveling. A good series. Now you're off to Pittsburgh, where the Penguins have obviously played pretty good last night, and Sidney Crosby is still a phenomenal player despite all the criticism he seems to receive.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a huge win. I had written a column where I basically said this series I feel was a referendum for whether or not they should keep the band together, and I don't know that they have to win, but I think they had to show some spark. They had no spark down the stretch. And, I was talking to an NHL executive, and we were talking about Crosby's season, and he said to me, Crosby actually has played pretty well, but he's got no one with him anymore. Kunitz had been disastrous down for the final 22 games of the season. Perron hadn't scored in 12 games. He still had points, but none of his line mates did. Someone got him a great pass last night. I can't even remember who made it. It might have been Kunitz, but and he converted that. And they had a real strong game. That Ranger team's a good team too. Right, so right. Winning this one game, I think is impressive, and I think it really helps. They'll go back to Pittsburgh now, where fans were pretty down on this team. There's a lot of discussion on talk radio about whether Malkin should be traded, whether it's time to make some moves to take 2 steps back to maybe go 4 steps forward, and people not liking the the wingers. Right now I would say the fans of Pittsburgh are happy with Malkin, Crosby, Hornquist, and Fleury, and Letang, and the rest of them they'd get rid of. So it'll be interesting. It'll be a good game. So I'll be going to that game, and then I'll come back and do the 2 Detroit games, and I'll go catch up with my Nashville Chicago series.
All right, Kevin. Well, safe travels, and we'll see you down at Joe Louis Arena. And that'll do it for this edition of the Red and White Authority, episode 17. 17, Gordie Howe's original number for the Red Wings. So we dedicate this to you, Gordie. Actually, the whole show is dedicated to you, each and every episode, because you are not only Mr. Hockey, you are a fine gentleman. And yeah, I'm all over the board today, Kevin. You got to shut me up somehow. I mean, I can sit here and talk all day. Anyway, that'll do it for this edition of the Red White Authority. For Kevin Allen, I'm Art Regner. Have a safe and pleasant one, everyone. Enjoy all the playoff hockey going on. Some really tremendous series, last-second heroics, a lot of good physical play. Just a really fine, elite brand of hockey being played in the NHL playoffs this year. So enjoy that until we meet again. As I said, take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.